Ladies and gentlemen, this is Petko and he will be my personal assistant today. Make sure you're settled comfortable because the story begins now. This is part 2 of the mini house. By the way, did you see part 1 where I built this mini sentimental house from zero? If you haven't seen that, it wouldn't make any sense. So go watch it first. I'm gonna now tell you a story. Once upon a time, there were some people. These people lived together and I'll start by building these postures of my polymer clay characters. These people loved and respected each other. This house, which if you've watched the first part of the video, should know that belonged to my ancestors. And my lovely childhood was there. And that's why I'm decorating this diorama today, to keep the memory alive by capsuling them in my art. Whole 9 generations have grown up in this house. Can you imagine that? Grandma, grandfather, back to their grandparents, even older grandparents. In the past, they valued what they had very much. They did not have much actually. Primitive vessels, primitive clothes, fireplace, gardens full of fruits, vegetables, warmth, community, faith and strength to build the beautiful house we use for villa today. Yes, it is restored, it is high in the mountain and I've decided to enrich the diorama with the spirits of my ancestors. Because every time I go there, I feel their presence, their kindness. I feel calm and protected. Far from everything, but close to them. Some of the things I'll be decorating the house with will not be from the same period. What do I mean? I believe there will be some very old items, but also more modern ones. Because this diorama will integrate the daily life of 3 generations that I want to arrange around the house, so it looks as if their souls are together guarding the house. I started dressing up the figures in authentic clothes of their time. I'll start with grandfather who built the house, sitting just bragging his accomplishment, very happy with the results he got. He was so smart and noble that I'm so proud of the energy with which he fuels me to this day. I have no idea what he looked like in reality, but here I'll encapsulate his presence and character exactly the way I feel it personally. It's still part of my DNA. They wore specific clothes, like there was something like a code for non-verbally speaking through clothes. For example, a carpenter is the one with dark trousers and the shepherd is one with light ones. The one with tight trousers will be not wealthy, and the one with the widest trousers is very wealthy, almost slipping on the ground, like that heavy. This is logical because in the past the fabric was expensive, so that means the more fabric you have on you, the more wealth you have. Yeah, that means you probably have cash. Or you've probably exchanged something very, very special, like sheep, cheese, extremely valuable and expensive. Also, the more embroidered the clothes were, the richer the person was. But grandfather, on this side of my kin, was not rich. Rather, I dressed him like that in this particular figure just because he deserved to be dressed like that if that was measured by his achievements, which is the house and many more. In the previous episode, I told you about the grandmother who set up a condition to grandfather, but I'm not gonna spoil you about it. You're gonna go and watch that moment of subscription. And now there'll be a grandfather who will chop wood. That's why he'll be in this posture. To this day, the house has a fireplace and there's firewood outside. It's just awesome. The grandfather of mine was an incredible worker, extremely pedantic, who cleaned his tools to a glance after his work. I've never seen him, and every time I'm doing something, I imagine him standing up next to me and being like, "Clean your things! Now! They're your tools, you should respect them!" Absolute disciplinary. Amazing. He was a huge man, so tall and huge that when he was going to buy some bread, he could fit it into the pocket of his coat. Can you imagine that? A whole bread. I'm actually mostly related to that one. Maybe because he was ambitious, he was stubborn, daring and sassy man. I actually have a picture of him. That's the only picture I have from the older ancestors. He looks like Jean Renault. And this here is the next grandfather who lived and took care of this house as well. He is famous for having a place for melting and processing wax. Generations ago, from this house, they used to build, I'm not sure how exactly it's called, it's like a mill, but it's a thing that is built by the river, uses the power of the water to rotate and move a special round stone that rubs against one another, and that's how it grounds wheat flour. There were no products available before as we have today. Absolutely everything has been produced literally from nothing, by hand. They were like, do we have soil? Yes, we sow, we eat. We have animals, we milk them. We cut their fur. From fur we do threads, wool, fabric, quilts and clothes. Absolutely everything had passed through their own hands, and that's the charm of it. That's why I respect the hands, I mean, as a body part. When I look at them, I understand who I am, what people were before me, how much power is in them. I'm sculpting everything out of single color polymer clay, because after I bake them, I will paint them by hand. I start with one tiny stove. They've had this type of stove later. They would rather have fireplaces. And do you know what? The activity was pretty much near the fireplace. I guess it's because they didn't have electricity, and that was the most well-lit part of the house. They were knitting there, writing. I still keep a tiny notebook of one of my granddads that says each thing that he borrowed, each thing that they borrowed from him, and making some sort of accounting, like a mini tiny notebook thingy. Yeah, you owe me some cheese. Yeah, I owe you some sheep. Yeah, okay. Right, yes, they used candles or later gas lights. Lucky, because my grandparents were having the wax processing thing, so they had plenty of candles, wax candles. Amazing. Now we go to the story of the vessels. All dishes, all vessels, of course. Handmade. Even the coppers, the metal ones. There were blacksmiths on every mile. Wildness. Here she is, the grandmother, because of which this house was built. The goddess of motivation. Fire in grandfather's heart. She is going to be tilting off the window, trying to get the dried clothes that she was drying on the sunlight. Yeah, I'm gonna make her gorgeous, with more clothes, sharp and confident, very sassy. I know an interesting story about her actually. It might be a legend, but my last grandfather told me that story. So when the grandfather who built the house was a handsome young guy and helped his father build a stable, then they went on a journey to a distant village to trade stones for goats. And then they stopped suddenly because their donkey was scared of a boar. And then the donkey freezed in place. Yes, but surprisingly, it stopped just right near a spring water where, guess who was pouring water into Harakumi, a divinely beautiful girl who froze twice as much as the donkey, not to speak of grandfather. Completely by instinct and primitively, he grabbed her and placed her on the wagon with him. Yes, women have been picked this way before. It's a bit weird, but of course, not by force. If the lady smiled to the gentleman, that's a sign. So that was the moment where she later sat her giant condition to him, which I mentioned in the other video. I will now put a little tiny bed, which brings me a memory of lying as a child on it next to grandmother, and outside was silently raining and tea was bubbling and smelled like thyme in the small warm room. Grandma was drying tea over the stove. Her home always smelled clean of lime wash and herbs. A great memory with aromas. That's why I adore rain. Rain is life. Rain makes flowers bloom. Rain is awesome. Anyways, outside the house, I remember there was a slight tapping I was hearing on metal bars which were placed there to collect the droplets watering the garden later. They were collecting that to have rainwater in case of too dry summer or when it wasn't raining. Good point, having those. Okay, here's the table. They did not have high tables. I still can't explain to myself why, but I assume it's because of the light near the fireplace. You have a fireplace here, and if your table is up there, you won't be able to see what you're eating. I mean, there wasn't that much of choice what to eat, but still, you sort of have to see what you're poking into. But speaking of poking, they were eating like this. Imagine they have the mini table and they sit on the ground or on a mini chairs. They had one huge vessel with food in front of them, just one, and each one of the family members had just one wooden spoon, and everyone was fighting for this food, like literally. It was epic. Everyone was trying to feed themselves after a long day of work. Unbelievable. I've experienced that. I mean, in this house with grandma. We were with our cousins fighting for kachamak, which is awesome. You should try it. This little chair is from my memories again. I specifically remember that one because it was extremely uncomfortable and squeaking every time, even if I wasn't moving. But I forgive it. Moving on. I had the most amazing dinners on this chair there with grandma. I wanted to give the objects a little bit more antique effect by dry brushing them on top with lighter paint. That's supposed to create depth and dimensions, highlights, shadows, deep, high. You get the point. Yeah, and here is again my favorite stove. I painted it black first, but I'll redo it in metallic color after. Grandmothers use a thing that's, I think, aluminium paste, which they use to clean their stoves. Be serious, concentrate. Yeah, so that paste was used to keep their stoves clean and beautiful. Well, people previously had mostly wheat, corn, bulgur, burgul, and instead of sugar, here's interesting, they had petmez, which is a concentrated syrup from high sugar fruits like, for example, sugar beet, plums, pumpkin. They used to put that on every sweet pastry they made. Oh, I'm gonna tell you one story about this house. At one point, it happened so that 2-3 families were living inside, and well, 2 old couples and 1 young family who had a daughter. She shared her heart with a lovely guy, which was the son of a blacksmith, probably looking like William Turner. However, the girl's father had a quarrel with the blacksmith, and they did not agree with each other sometimes. So the young people, however, despite that, looked secretly for each other. The young man stood at the closed door outside and whistled a melody like a bird. And on the inside, the girl was like... And they knew that the night after, they were supposed to meet near the barn, where the grandma was sending the girl to feed the cows. But the grandma wasn't that stupid. She had a watchful eye and sneaky ears. And one day, she decides to send the girl not to feed the cows, but to go to the mill. And the same day, when the girl went to the mill, the grandma stood patiently on the inside of the door, waiting for the guy to arrive. She was sitting patiently there, and an hour later, the guy knocked quietly. Hey, I'd like to hold your hand for a bit. And the grandma silently got her wrinkly, huge hand, and he screamed out of stress and ran away and never came back. And unfortunately, this love story ends here. The girl then aged like a nurse who was bringing milk on request. It's a true story, by the way. My actual grandma that's alive now told me this story. She keeps every memory that was passed verbally in a little notebook that she promised to give me one day. Now I'll make the last details as part of the figures and start with the fruit. I'll make the apple tree that's still there, by the way, in the garden. The tastiest and juiciest apples, of course. The third family planted this tree and it's a perfect summer shade. Lovely, such a rest in there, especially with the summer breeze, the aromas. After I've made it out of wire, I'm mixing some common brown with little food coloring. I do it because the small packages the industry sell don't get me to anywhere, and they're freaking expensive. Yet here is a good alternative to do them this way. I'm mixing 2 shades to create depth and shadows so it looked more realistic. I'm placing cotton balls and hairspraying them, like the whole thing, so the brown can stick. But don't worry, I sprayed the entire thing with clear varnish heavily. That's gonna keep the brown to the cotton strongly attached, and it's gonna stop it from dripping down. I decided to make myself small apples, because why not? The ones from the stores are very fake looking, so I sculpted it myself with polymer clay again. I then painted them with one dark red, then yellow strokes. Now I'm moving on to the grapevines. The most modern thing on this house, because we planted that a couple of years ago. There never used to be grape there, just because it's a mountain. We're very up high there, and people weren't believing that grape was gonna grow and give fruits. But a fact, my dad does wine from it to satisfy his greed, and it's absolutely beautiful. I'm just braiding some greens into the wire and twisting it together. I then make little grapes, because why not? If it's the coolest diorama, let it be the coolest diorama. Talking about grapes, my last grandfather's donkey swallowed 15 liters of wine prep mix, which is alcoholic, and died heroically drunk. Poor donkey. Yes, even today there is a restaurant near the road to the mountain that has the samar on display, like in a gallery in front of the door, with the whole story written there. Maybe if one day you're a happy tourist here, you will read the story yourself. I guess that's been placed there to warn people to be careful drinking. Enough stories for today, my dear person who's watching there. It's time to put up the last details and remind you to be thankful to your ancestors for your existence, because they're always with us, protecting and loving us. Learn more stories about their life, and you will surprisingly find out amazing things.